are talking about the genre-mashing Brightburn. This one is directed by David Yarovsky and is produced by Guardians of the Galaxy director James Gunn and written by Brian and Mark Gunn, who I am assuming are part of the Gunn family, but I'm not quite sure if they're actually related to James Gunn, but there you go. So this focuses on one young boy and kind of fuses the horror genre with the superhero genre. Now, if you are familiar with Superman and the kind of his origins, this ultimately is kind of a retelling of a very, very similar story. Now, in the Superman mythos, he comes to Earth from Krypton and is, raised by, Martha and Clark and Jonathan Kent and becomes the hero. So this almost takes like, what if he was actually evil? And, very similar kind of setup. Crash lands to Earth as a baby, is adopted by this kind of like loving kind of family, this couple who live on a farm, but this time the actual baby turns out to be an evil. So you think Ultraman, who is kind of the Superman from an alternate dimension. There has been kind of like, so there is presence of it in the DC universe. So so let's discuss obviously what works. So it's far more of a horror movie than a superhero movie. It's not even a superhero movie. If anything, it's a supervillain movie, but it plays like a horror film. So don't be expecting kind of like the big action set pieces, more like a superhero film. This kind of plays with kind of creeping, building tension kind of up and up. Obviously, with a kind of a violent kind of payoff at the kind of the end. So it very much plays more like a horror film. So this is almost a comparable movie, more along the lines of kind of your slashers almost. But it is this kid is ultimately an alien who is very much like our kind of modern superheroes. So it's a very interesting take, and I feel as a fan of both genres, this is a movie that is perfect for me. So what works with this film? I actually thought this did work as a story, and it's having kind of had the exposure to Superman and superhero movies and horror movies. I really appreciated this subverting of this kind of this tale that we've kind of seen many times before, and having a kind of a different slant on it. So it's almost like a kind of a DC Elseworlds. And I thought the story was fantastic. The story isn't particularly overly complicated. But I think it works, and I thought everyone here does a great job acting-wise. The cast is headed up by Elizabeth Banks, who's kind of the named actress here, who kind of plays the mother. You've got Jackson Dunn, who plays the young boy Brandon, and David Denman as the father figure. I thought all three kind of main actors there do a good job here. So the good dramatic elements as well. And when we do see our kind of effects. They do work, and they come across like horror effects, but we kind of we know that this is kind of a subversion of the superhero genre, but in a frightening way, and it kind of makes you kind of see things maybe in a different way. So I thought that was all excellent, and it really an evil super being does make for a pretty good horror element. And I've got to say, I was surprised how gory this is. Now you may have seen the glass in the eye scene from some of the trailers, but that's not the only thing. There's also a particularly kind of gruesome scene involving a car or a truck, and kind of what happens to the person involved in that. That was pretty gruesome. And there's a couple of other kind of like quite bloody deaths as well. I mean, the violence it's not like killing after killing. There's there's pockets of violence, but it's not the whole way through the movie. I thought the character work. I do have some issues with some of the motivations we'll come on to, but I thought for the most part the characters were kind of believable, and they were well-rounded and kind of believable sort of characters. And the story was tight, well told, and well directed. Did I have any quibbles with this movie? The main one for me was I felt there's two, I would say. So the main one for me was I felt some of the character motivations didn't add up to me. Now, I can't go into specifics because I don't want to go into spoilers here. Suffice it to say, a lot of this film is nature versus nurture. And that could be a thing, but it seems to me that this movie almost disregards nurture and kind of like it hasn't had any effect. And I personally would have liked to have seen a little bit more of a questioning, a bit more of a struggle from from Brandon, who just seems to, when he hits puberty, he just, you know, becomes evil. And there would have been a little bit, for me, I would have liked to have seen a little bit more kind of involved in that. I mean, we kind of get that he's getting these voices telling him to kind of like take over the earth or whatever. It's kind of like a line that he's said to him. But because he's had this kind of this upbringing from a very loving family, I would have liked to have maybe seen a little bit more conflict. But the same is also said of the parents in the kind of the last kind of act of this film. Again, I felt that without kind of giving away anything, they've had this kind of child for 12 years of their life, and they're treating him like their own son. And I don't know, the kind of the motivations were not quite on point to me. They just seemed to be one way or the other. Let me put it like that. Hard to talk about without kind of spoiling anything, but suffice it to say, I thought some of the motivations and the kind of the character choices here were not quite as good as I would have liked. The only other thing here, there's a really obvious piece of foreshadowing in the movie that almost is like to the level of convenience, especially when we are told there's never anything like happened in the last 12 years. But that's a relatively minor point. Overall, I thought this is a thoroughly entertaining movie with very kind of violent scenes, and so much so that they're shocking, especially when you put it in context of a super person movie, because you don't really see that. So seeing I don't want to say superhero, but a super villain movie essentially, where we have some very gory deaths, it kind of puts into practice what we see when we see all this kind of collateral damage happening in the kind of like the stuff like Man of Steel, and this is the cause of it and stuff. And obviously the powers of the kind of the glowing eyes, like we've seen in Batman vs Superman, do add for some scary visuals here. There are a couple of kind of unanswered questions. The kind of the little graph that he's drawing all over the place, the little his little symbol is kind of unexplained. It's actually from an anime called Berserk. Obviously the director's a huge fan of that one, but yes, it doesn't really tell you why he's writing that, but there you go. So yeah, overall I think this is a pretty decent horror film. Certainly more of a horror film than a superhero film, so I feel if you're more on that side and you like superheroes, then this is definitely one for you. But it's very well made, very entertaining, definitely kind of leaves the door open for a potential sequel, although that would have to be a considerably higher budget than the way it kind of leaves off. And it closes it in a pretty satisfying way. I kind of like the end of the movie. So overall, I'm going to give this one a 7 out of 10. Definitely worth a watch. I enjoyed this one quite a bit. You know, hoping there'll be a steelbook of this one at some point, because I'm picking it up. 7 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.